In a recent exchange that left a New York Times reporter momentarily speechless, Senator J.D. Vance presented a provocative solution to America's migrant crisis that challenges the prevailing narrative on immigration. By advocating for the employment of millions of American men who have dropped out of the labor force instead of relying on undocumented workers, Vance ignited a fiery debate about immigration, labor, and economic policy. His bold stance raises questions about the role of illegal immigrants in the U.S. economy and whether the country can tap into its own workforce for solutions. The conversation surrounding illegal immigration in the United States has reached a fever pitch, especially in light of recent remarks by Senator J.D. Vance. During an interview with New York Times podcast host Lulu Garcia-Navarro, Vance dismantled the argument that illegal immigrants are essential for the functioning of the U.S. economy. He presented a seemingly straightforward alternative: why not focus on the 7 million American men who have dropped out of the labor force, many of whom could be steered into available jobs in industries like construction? Vance's position has stirred both admiration and criticism, but it undeniably pushes the conversation about immigration policy in a new direction. As he articulated his views, Vance not only questioned the status quo but also suggested a path forward that might engage an often overlooked segment of the American populace. In his compelling argument, Vance posited that the U.S. should not be dependent on undocumented labor to sustain its economy. Instead, he emphasized the potential of millions of American men who are currently out of work, urging that they could fill critical roles in various sectors, particularly in construction. Vance highlighted a key point: the current economic structure has been conditioned to rely on cheap labor from undocumented immigrants, which often leads to stagnant wages and discourages American citizens from taking up available jobs. This is one of the really deranged things that I think illegal immigration does to our society, Vance asserted. It gets us in a mindset of saying we can only build houses with illegal immigrants, and we have 7 million just men, not even women, who have completely dropped out of the labor force. Garcia-Navarro countered Vance's claims by pointing out that a significant portion of the construction workforce is indeed Hispanic, and many of them are undocumented. Her question centered on the logistics of maintaining housing construction if a mass deportation of undocumented workers were to occur. Vance's response was both direct and sarcastic, insisting that the assumption that the industry relies solely on undocumented labor ignores historical context and the adaptability of American workers. He emphasized that the housing crisis could not be solely blamed on illegal immigration; rather, it was a symptom of deeper systemic issues, including a failure to create livable wages for American workers in these sectors. Further diving into the topic, Vance argued that big companies prefer importing cheap labor rather than paying fair wages to American workers, creating a cycle of dependency that harms both the economy and the individuals involved. He remarked, "People say, well, Americans won't do those jobs. Americans won't do those jobs for below-the-table wages, they won't do those jobs for non-living wages. But people will do those jobs. They will just do those jobs at certain wages." This perspective challenges the narrative that Americans are unwilling to take on blue-collar jobs, suggesting instead that the current labor market dynamics are skewed against them. With a clear vision for the future, Vance asserted that a potential Trump-Vance administration would prioritize the removal of illegal immigrants living in the U.S. He claimed that this move would alleviate the housing crisis by freeing up homes currently occupied by undocumented individuals, ultimately allowing more American citizens access to housing. Vance described the current state of affairs as a disgrace, asserting that importing labor at poverty wages has led to the erosion of the American middle class. His remarks echo a broader sentiment among certain political factions that argue for a fundamental reevaluation of immigration policies in light of economic realities and labor market needs. The reaction to Vance's statements has been mixed, with some celebrating his views as a necessary call to action, while critics argue that such policies could exacerbate labor shortages in essential industries. The debate ignited by Vance's remarks illustrates a crucial turning point in the discourse around immigration, labor, and the economy, as it forces policymakers and the public to consider the implications of their positions on these intertwined issues. As J.D. Vance continues to champion a radical reevaluation of immigration policies, his arguments spark vital conversations about labor, the economy, and the potential of the American workforce. By suggesting that America can rely on its own citizens rather than importing labor, Vance challenges entrenched beliefs and opens the door for a more profound discussion on how to tackle issues like the housing crisis and the labor shortage. While his proposals may be contentious, they undeniably reflect a growing frustration with the status quo and the urgency for innovative solutions in an ever-changing economic landscape. As the dialogue evolves, it remains to be seen whether this perspective will gain traction among policymakers and the public alike.